early for the West Coast people, but thank you for being here with us. We are so excited about this topic and the key takeaways you're going to get from those amazing panelists. I am very excited to be here. My name is Eduardo. I am a community events manager at Modern Sales Pros, and I'll be your host for today. While we give folks a little bit to join the event with us, I have a quick icebreaker for my speakers, and I'm going to start with Nicole. What is the best day that you had recently?
Yes, I'm going to go with something super recent. So on Saturday, I actually got back into hot yoga, took my dog for a long walk, went for brunch. So very stereotypical day, but trying to be a little bit more intentional with relaxing on the weekend. So just had a collection of my favorite things to end off a week.
That sounds really fun. What do you get for brunch?
Was trying to be, relatively conscious after hot yoga. I thought a full eggs Benny might be a little bit too much. So I just got eggs and toast, the classic, with a nice
That's good.
coffee.
Sounds good. What about you, David? What was the best day you had recently?
So I'm also going Saturday. I one of my good friends I've been friends with since like sixth grade got married, and so we went up
Oh,
to Vermont at this incredible resort and just had a wonderful time with my wife. Got to relax. It was our first weekend away. I just had a newborn, so that was wonderful. I'll say the day after, not so wonderful, but Saturday was great.
well, congratulations to your friend and congratulations on your newborn. What about you, Bill? What's the best day you had recently?
Yeah, sure. Not as exciting, I don't think, as David's. That's a tough act to follow. But also Saturday, very recent. My daughter's first grade soccer team had their first game, and I have volunteered to coach this year. So it went really well. I was a little anxious about it, but everyone had fun, and it was a blast. Looking forward to the season.
That's good. Salespeople love being coaches, right? So I
Yes.
think if it's the character. And last but not least, Matt, what's the best day you had recently?
Yeah. Well, Bill, we're going to have to connect later because I actually coach high school soccer as well.
Let's go.
This past Saturday for me was just a really nice day. I live in Portland, Oregon, where it's been very, very hot recently. We had the perfect fall day on Saturday. It was like 68 degrees, slightly overcast. And my wife and I went wine tasting with a few friends, and it was just such a great way to kind of say goodbye to summer, get ready for fall, a little bit cooler weather. Really, really nice day this weekend.
That's good. Sounds like this weekend was really productive for all of us, right? Great. If you're in the audience watching us, tell us where you're calling us from. We'd love to hear from people all over the world. So tell us where you're calling from. While I do my quick intro here. So we are here today to talk about rise and grind. Why effective prospecting is less hustle, more intelligence. With this awesome panelists that you just met, they're gonna do more intros in a little bit. I am excited about this event and all the key takeaways you're gonna get. And today's event is brought to you by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you not familiar with MSP, we are the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales, sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and sales enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. And our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions that they would struggle to solve on their own and to see around corners that might not know about. And we do that through live sessions like this amazing one that you're about to experience. We have a robust online forum, and we also host quarterly summits. And we have one coming up in October. I'm going to give you a little bit more detail in a little bit. And we also have in-person events, which is very, very excited after the pandemic. So if you're already not part of the MSP, you will be invited to join after this event. And as I said, we have our summit coming up. Let me copy this link over here to put in the chat. We gather a lot of events. It's a 3-day Revenue Excellence Summit happening October 11th through the 13th. We put together 24 events of amazing content and speakers. You can hear from the CEO of Zoom Info, Gansai, Cowboy Ventures, and Winning by Design, as well as sales leaders at Lattice, Pendo, and Outreach, and Atrium, and much, much more. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat right now for you to sign up for it and get your free pass for our amazing summit. But enough about MSP. This event today is sponsored by the team at Sales Intel. Now I'm going to pass to David Reed so he can give us a few words about the amazing work that Sales Intel is doing. Hey, David.
Hey, everyone. Really excited for today's topic. I think with us being a data company, it is so important to be strategic and to be intelligent with your prospecting and your outreach strategy. And that's what Sales Intel helps you guys with. We are a B2B contact data provider. We compete with some of the largest brands in the world, like ZoomInfo. We have human verified mobile numbers and email addresses that we re-verify every 90 days to make sure that your team gets the accurate and consistent direct dial information for the decision makers you guys are looking for. And then we layer on incredible technology like tech stack, as well as intent data, so that your team has that perfect triangle, which we'll talk about later, to target the right prospects in motion that are looking for your product and service right now.
Awesome. That's amazing. It's so great to have you as a sponsor. I am excited to dive in, as I said, but first, I'm still going to talk a little bit more. I have some housekeeping notes. First, this event is being recorded. We wouldn't let this knowledge go to the ether, so you will receive a follow-up email with the recording and the key takeaways from our panelists. And also, I was talking with my panelists backstage, and they said they want to get pumped for this week. So let's ask them a lot of questions using the Q&A function right on your right-hand side. There's a Q&A button right there. Just send them a lot of questions and we will make sure to get to the questions during the event. And finally, we're here to talk about prospecting with intelligence, sponsored by Sales Intel, and I have this amazing cohort of panelists here. I'm going to pass it to Matt. He's our moderator for today. So Matt, please introduce yourself, and then you can ask the speakers to introduce themselves, and we can kick things off. Again, audience, send them a lot of questions. I'll be back here at the end for some outro and to give some clarity about the recording, how people are going to receive the recording after. Matt, you can take it from here.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Eduardo. And hi, everybody. Great to have you here. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Matt Liebman. I am currently the director of mid-market sales development at a company called Demandbase. We are an account-based marketing company. I live in Portland, Oregon, as I said earlier. And I personally have been in the sales world for the last 12 years. Specifically in the sales leadership world for the last 8, and really have focused on sales development and prospecting for the last 4 years for me. Very excited to be here. This is a really, really valuable topic for us all to learn and share some best practices around effective prospecting and how to be smarter. So I'm excited to be joined by such a great group of people. Bill, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, happily, Matt. Thanks, everyone. And really honored to be a part of this panel and speaking today. It's a topic I'm super passionate about. I've been in sales and sales leadership for just about 15 years. Currently running a new logo commercial team at Outreach. For those of you who haven't heard of Outreach, Outreach helps revenue teams generate more pipeline, win more deals, improve forecast accuracy, and consolidate overlapping tools into a single unified platform. So kind of on the nose for the topic here, as it's very core to what we do and the things we're talking to sales folks about every day. Shameless plug, if any of you are going to be in the San Francisco area for Dreamforce this week, I will be there. Love to swing by, say hi, or shoot me a note on LinkedIn. We've got some happy hours and fun stuff going on. Would love to interact with people in real life again. So looking forward to that. I will pass it to Nicole.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill. Not sure how many Canadians we have in the house or if I've already started to give it away with some of those vowels, but my name's Nicole Plant. I'm from up north for most of you in Toronto, Canada. I'd say I've been kind of eating, sleeping, breathing, prospecting, and all things SDR for the last 3 years since entering the sales world. Started off as an SDR myself, moving up from commercial accounts all the way up into large enterprise logos. And then I spent just under a year in SDR enablement, focusing on a lot of the training for strategic prospecting. And now I am a manager of sales development, all at the same company called Lupio. So for those of you that don't know, essentially we help automate the response to things like RFPs and security questionnaires. So I'm sure some of our account executives in the house have felt that headache. But now I'm leading our commercial team, and this is something that's been really top of mind. So super pleased to be up here today with an awesome panel. All right, David, I believe I'm passing it to you.
Awesome. Yeah, so super excited for today's conversation. I'm a senior director here at Sales Intel, focus on mid-market SMB, as well as a lot of enterprise deals. So I kind of manage the whole spectrum. Have loved sales and prospecting and the hustle and the grind of it for probably something similar, 15 or so years now. And just can't wait to kind of get into this subject and talk a little bit more, share some of our experiences and hopefully help some people out.
Amazing. Thanks, David. And thanks, Nicole and Bill as well. We are really excited to dive into this today. And David, I'll just start with you, man. You just said the hustle, the grind. You've been at it for a long time. You know what it means to find the right people, find the wrong people. How do you think about when you're talking to SDRs, you're talking about to SDR leaders, how do you think people should be prioritizing their accounts?
Yeah, it's a topic that is incredibly frustrating if you've been in that position, trying to figure out like, how do I structure this and how do I set up my team? And I'll say that one of the biggest factors for us last year, 27% of our revenue and our number one outbound channel was focused on a messaging around tech stack. It is a very underutilized strategy within our system. Of course, you want to have, dial in your firmographics, get the right employee size that fits within the personas that you guys are going after. And we get a lot of people that come in looking for intent data. We partner with Bombora, who provides, great resources to find those people within cycle. But what I really try and guide people in is, you want your firmographics, you want your intent data, whatever signals you're getting from, and then you need that third technographic component to get that nice little triangle. That's really where we find those messaging. It just really resonates. It makes it so much easier with your openers for your teams. And especially if you've got partnerships with some of those companies as well, it just makes it so much easier.
Amazing. And I live in the intent data space as well. So I'll plus one you on that and just add that, we live in a world that some people might say is maybe a little bit creepy with how much everybody can know about what someone's doing online. But the reality is, if you have good intent, if you have good intent data, you get to know the people that are searching for your competitors, the people that are searching for what you do before they ever come to your website. And I'll just repeat that so that everybody here listening can really, really hone in on what that means. We could tell you and your teams what people are looking for what you do or looking for your competitors before they ever come to your website. It's a game changer when you have this kind of data, when you're doing your targeting. So David, I couldn't agree more.
I'll say one more thing. When I first got here, I was a little skeptical of it because I had sold in the digital marketing space for almost a decade before I came to Sales Intel. And I was like, yeah, but like, it can't be that realistic. And I routinely get on demos and we run a search for a prospect. Oh, I'm engaged with that company right now. Oh, I'm engaged with that company right now. It happens literally all the time.
Awesome. It's really cool. And so we have, let's say, okay, I've got this intent data and now I know who to go after. I know the accounts that I'm supposed to go after and prioritize. Nicole, I think you have some really interesting strategies about kind of how the SDR can map out their day, map out their efficiency, really put the math together of will I succeed or not? Can you walk us through that a little bit?
For sure. I don't think I can take the full credit. I think the term SDR math was coined by John Barrows. So if he's out in the stratosphere listening, that's when I was first introduced to this concept. And essentially has a spreadsheet that breaks it down that I've now adapted for my team more anecdotally. And I think the challenging part about math and metrics and prioritization is there's pretty much endless metrics that you can run for your performance, whether that's as a team, as an individual. And then once you start getting into those comparison metrics, metrics, it's like, holy smokes, there's a lot of things to work through. And it can be really hard as a new sales rep, especially as an SDR. Usually this is your first sales role, to really understand what's important to me right now from a metrics perspective, and what does that actually mean if it's going up or down in comparison to the benchmark that I have. So I think the first thing that you need to do is just zoom out and think about, what am I really trying to evaluate with SDR math? So it's usually quantity, which is the first thing that comes to mind, but then of course quality. And there's different levers that you can pull there that are going to impact those kind of inputs. And then obviously different metrics to measure that. So when we're thinking about those different levers, volume usually comes up. Tiering and prioritization is going to come up from a quality perspective. And ultimately your outreach strategy. You can only have highly customized outreach to so many people. So you need to consider all of these different factors and how you're going to break down your day-to-day, because you're not going to speak to a tier A prospect like you would maybe a revival prospect or a tier C prospect. So then when we think about the metrics, I think a lot of people always resort to activity metrics. So that's kind of been the common mindset of, not hitting quota, I need to turn up the heat and do some more activity. But I think what you need to start to do is individualize it in that case. So yes, it's good to look at trends across your team or look at industry benchmarks and how you, but more so how you've performed historically. So I think some other things that are important to bring into this conversation are metrics around conversion. So how many accounts do I need to touch to book a meeting versus getting an SAO? How many people are actually active in my pipeline? And what's my engagement rate? That's going to look very different for every SDR, because you're going to have a different approach to prioritization. You're going to have a different outreach strategy. So I think peeling back the onion of what am I really trying to impact and what does it mean when it goes up or down? Because going up in certain metrics isn't always a good thing. And sometimes you can forget that when you're deep into the data.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nicole. And it's awesome that you mentioned conversion rates, because I think that segues really well also as we're thinking about the whole purpose of our conversation today, and how your effective prospecting is more about the intelligence you have versus the hustle you have. Conversion rates is a massive part of that. How many emails does it take to convert into a conversation? How many conversations does it take to convert into a meeting? How many meetings does it take to convert into an accepted meeting and an accepted pipeline? And so, as we think about assessing that conversion and assessing if you're succeeding or not, and should I tweak things? Is this working? Should I try something new? Bill, I wanted to ask you, you've been leading teams for a long time. You work for Outreach, which is arguably the leading sales enablement platform out there right now, and telling us all our open rates, our click-through rates. You have sales productivity reports. How do you guide leaders just like yourself on how to assess, like, are we succeeding right now? Is this conversion rate good enough, or what should I change?
Yeah, I love this question. I think this kind of goes without saying, but you'd be surprised how often we hear that's not the case. But number one thing is obviously measure it. Make sure you're measuring it, and your frontline managers, SDR managers, or even AE managers who have AEs who are still prospecting and responsible for pipeline generation, make sure that they know it's being measured and it's being inspected on a weekly basis. And it's not just the frontline manager, that it's important to the organization, and people are looking at it. I think the second part too, that kind of plays into our theme today, is about, working not just hard, but also smart and intelligently, is, I think the SDR world has been established, and the KPIs there have been well established for years now. And we kind of think of a lot of those metrics as kind of vanity metrics. I think where it gets really interesting is we peel the onion back and get a layer deeper. So let's look at like reply rates, for example. Reply rates can only tell you so much. It doesn't tell you if it's a negative reply or a positive reply. So, whether you have a tool like Outreach or something, just make sure as a leader, you're inspecting the sentiment behind those replies and understand what's working and what's not. And, and constantly A/B test everything, subject lines, content, and make sure your team's enabled and equipped with the stuff that's working, right? And is kind of all rowing in the right direction. The other sort of, I think, layer deeper that a lot of folks, do that or aren't doing because it's a little sophisticated, is also getting down to like the persona. We all sell to probably 5-6 different personas in any organization. Which messaging is resonating well and which is not. And even on top of that, seniority level, right? We think in terms of above the line, below the line here. What's where's our messaging working and where is it not, based on seniority and then based on persona. And again, what's working? How do we enable the team to kind of use the right thing and go forward? And back to just the measuring and tracking of it, of all these data points, is making sure you're comparing across teams. If you're a large organization, how's the West team doing against the East team? How are individuals doing against one another? And then how does that trending over time? Making sure you're reporting on that so that people see it. And, we're all in sales and pretty competitive, and make sure they know kind of where they stand. So that's a couple ways that I think about it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Bill. And you mentioned something that I think is a little bit more of a revolutionary idea in today's world versus generic thinking, which is that sentiment on those reply rates. And just to double click on that for everybody that is listening today, if you were assessing your team and you were looking at the sentiment, what would you say is that benchmark that you're looking for from your top reps for a positive reply rate sentiment?
Yeah, one thing I was going to add in there is that is a really eye-opening experience, because a lot of times, like, you have someone in your organization that's taken charge of, your outreach or your sales loft cadences, and you're looking at that and you're saying, I got a 14% response rate from my sequence, and then you look in and it's all thanks, unsubscribe, not interested.
Totally.
And so it is so important to go through that. And I audit some of our teams as well, and every once in a while you'll also find, hey, a rep dropped the ball and like this person responded and they said, hey, not right now, but we're interested in 2 months. So it's really, really important, I think, to understand what the sentiment of those response rates are, because that helps you make sure that your team is going to be as successful as possible.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too. Once you start to bucket those different especially objections, into different categories, say for example, you're hearing competition come up, or we've got a renewal, making sure your team has a battle card to handle that specific competitive intel, and are equipped with just a way to quickly handle that. I think speed is super important too. And right now I think the conversation right now, it's easy to measure and track the email side of things, right? We're still getting the majority of our meetings, at least internally here, over the phone, right? So making sure folks are they have enablement there on the phone with them too, to give them those battle cards, and also that the sentiment and what happens, what's the result of that call, the disposition, and again, starting to identify trends and compare across teams and over time.
Awesome.
One question I had for Nicole here is, looking at that SDR math, like that, I used to build out models in my previous org around that SDR math. So I'm kind of curious, right? I would imagine it changes dramatically based on enterprise, mid-market, SMB, but what are some of the consistent trends that you see?
Mm-hmm. I think the most interesting one to me that I've been tracking the last few months with the team is it's really tied to that conversion. So how many unique accounts do you need to touch each month in order to hit quota? And, not necessarily surprisingly in a commercial space, but we're seeing a really high connection between the amount of unique accounts in your pipeline with performance from a sales accepted opportunity perspective. Just typically higher velocity, they'll make decisions a little bit faster. So they're entering and exiting the pipeline a lot faster than, in an enterprise environment where there's more multi-threading, there's more ongoing conversations. So that's something that we've been keeping a really tight eye on over the last few months to make sure that stays high. Doesn't necessarily mean brand new, net new accounts. That would be a little aggressive, but it's like, is it unique to your pipeline? In the last 6 months, we use a tool called Atrium that does a lot of those comparison metrics, which has been really helpful.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. We are off to a great start here, and really diving into the details. So I think, we've talked about, let's figure out our accounts with the right data. Let's go after the right people. We've talked about how do I build out my own path to success, the math that's going to take place. Then we talked about how do I assess whether it's working or not. Let's move a little bit to the outreach itself, and the messaging that goes into successful prospecting. Nicole, we were all connecting before this panel, and we were talking about, how do I find the reason to reach out to someone versus just like, hi, my name's Matt. I want to sell you something. Please buy it from me today, right? Like, how do you actually find that reason? And also, how does data help tell that story? David touched on it a little bit with maybe they have a certain software, but Nicole, would love your take on how you can best create that reason for your outreach with your prospects.
Mm-hmm. So I think, I'll follow my sword in order to not be a hypocrite. When I was an SDR, I would often find an account, it fit our ICP, and I was like, awesome, good to go. I'm going to reach out. Like, they're obviously going to be interested. And now that I'm a little bit wiser, I can use the tech stack a little bit better, and there's been more functionality added. The biggest thing that I preach is you need to have a reason to reach out in order to be relevant, because otherwise, to your point, Matt, it's literally going to sound like you're calling someone and their number 275 on a list of 300 leads that your company bought for you. Ultimately, you're trying to convey that you don't know their business better than them, but you do have an idea of what's happening in their business and essentially how that's connected to whatever you're trying to sell. So answering those very critical questions of why them specifically, and why now. So I often refer to this as like a sales signal or a trigger that you're looking for, and essentially you're working backwards. So let's build out lists, let's build out sets of accounts or cohorts of accounts that all have a similar reason for why you're reaching out, and then verbalizing that through what we would call a bridge. So you can't just talk about, I saw you just hired 30 salespeople. Do RFPs take you a long time? Those are connected, and often SDRs will have a very strong logic of why those impact each other, but you need to make it super easy for the prospect to understand. So for Lupio, we're typically looking for some sort of change in bandwidth on the sales or proposal team. So, they're having more leads, they have more or less people, some reason that they would need efficiency. So then what the team can then do is go into tools like Zoom Info and LinkedIn Sales Navigator and use those specific filters to find people with triggers related to that, and then customize their messaging from there. So in Zoom Info, sorry, David, we're a Zoom Info shop, but look at things like intent, in terms of what they've been searching for, but then also scoop. So has there been recent hires or recent changes in hiring plans? Has there been funding, et cetera? And then on LinkedIn, there's some really cool filters like leads that already follow your company, for example, or you can actually track past champions. So did someone use Lupio at a previous company and move somewhere new in your segment? So really working backwards of finding that reason and then making it super obvious of how that ties into what you're trying to sell to make that connection really easy for the prospect.
Nice. I love that, Nicole. And if I could just add on one thing, I love everything you said, where we need to find the connection, right? We need to find what is the purpose that I'm reaching out to today. And something I'll add from my perspective with the SDRs that I lead is how you present that information also makes a really big difference. The average person doesn't like being told something. We like being asked something, right? So there's a really, really big difference. This is a subtle nuance, but there's a really, really big difference between reaching out to someone and saying, since your sales team has grown by this much, you must be struggling with your RFP efficiency. Here's how we can help. And saying, our software told us that your sales team grew by this much this year. How are you currently handling all of those RFPs? Mm-hmm. And it's just subtle. It's a small difference, right? But it's changing from an assumptive communication style to a non-assumptive communication style. And as we're thinking about effectively prospecting, making those assumptions, it doesn't make your buyer feel good. It doesn't make the person on the other end excited to have that conversation with you. And the best case scenario is that like you were right. And then they're like, okay. But you have this massive worst case scenario where you made a huge assumption about them and they don't agree with anything that you've said. And now you've burned that bridge, right? So instead, when you find this compelling event, when you find this connection, like Nicole mentioned, you're asking them a question that you know is going to lead to a place you want to be. But communicating that way, communicating non-assumptively, is going to enable you to have that really positive conversation. So not only find that connection, but present it in a non-assumptive way would be the only thing I would add. Mm-hmm. So now we know how to reach out, right? I have my efficient list. I know how I'm going to measure it. Now I know what I'm going to say. I found a connection. There's so much data out there today, right? We have a lot of us have Sales Navigator, Sales Intel, Zoom Info, Demand Base, Outreach, everything that we see, Facebook pages, Twitter feeds, everything. Bill, how do you get your reps to not fall into analysis paralysis and not just look at things over and over and over? How do you get them to just find that right message without paralyzing themselves?
Yeah. I'll share a personal anecdote because I think I was excited about the topic of today because I, as an SDR, was like a bit thick-headed on how I approached it. I think I was famous for making like 250 calls one day and not getting a single meeting. And so that was like an eye-opening moment to be like, I gotta work smarter. There's gotta be a better way. And so I think, the number one thing, is again, making sure you're tracking it. And I think the number one thing is, okay, number of, meetings that they book that happen in a month. And then what of those, what happened with them? How far did they go down the pipeline? What is like the hard dollars associated with that? So I urge any leaders out there, if they're building comp plans for SDRs, definitely have that quantity and quality component if at all possible. And I think, see who's being successful in those two areas and kind of back up the sales math that Nicole mentioned earlier. I do think, there still has to be hard KPIs that you want to measure, but I think the days of like 150 outbound calls might be over unless you're using like a power dialer or just, kind of a unique sort of sales motion. I think it's important that the SDRs or again, even AEs who are busy and need to generate their own pipeline as well. Fun fact, our AEs at Outreach generate about 25 to 33% of our own pipeline. And so we had kind of like a moment when COVID hit where we said, we can't just sit back and rely on our SDR team. And since then we've been really kind of pressing the team. So how they spend their day is super important, right? There's only so many hours in the day where you can catch someone on the phone or when they're likely to respond to an email. So I think knowing what those hours are where you're most likely to connect with someone over the phone, and kind of dividing up your day appropriately. Depending on the culture of organization too, like I know I've been at many places in the past, even when my early sales career as an SDR, I would spend the weekend doing my prospecting, right? Like I knew if I could find 50 to 100 new people to target in my non-selling hours, I could be that much more efficient during the week and not spend time combing through technographic stuff and, LinkedIn Sales Nav or whatever. At the time, this was pre-Zoom Info, pre-Sales Intel. So dating myself, but making sure like you're making it easier for the SDR or the AE to do actual selling activities during selling hours because it's finite. There's only so much. And so I've used in the past was chunked out times on the calendar. This is the time to prospect. This is the time to call. Again, like don't just guess on that. Make sure you're coming to that with data on, sharing with them when we've definitely connect with people on the phone more often and, give them a chance. But if you're just telling them make 100 calls this week and add 25 people to the top of the funnel from your prospecting efforts, and that's all you're looking at, it's, I don't know if you're setting your team up for success.
Awesome.
Yeah. To add on to that, right? I think the prep time is so important. When I look at my most successful reps, that's what they're doing is they're taking non-selling hours and they're out there doing research, figuring out who they want to go after. And us as a leadership team, right? We're operationalizing that sort of stuff, pulling in our intent scores, updating all of our topics all into Salesforce to try and make their job easier in terms of like finding the accounts that they should be going after. But I think the other thing that's important for us as sales leaders is to Nicole and to Bill's point is understanding what those metrics are. So like for us, right, understanding what you need in order to be successful. So we look at, hey, you need to have 60 accounts in sequence. You need to have 3 to 5 prospects with these specific personas. We need customized sequencing for each one of those personas, right? Like the sequence shouldn't be more than, I'll say this just for me, not recommending this for everyone, but in the last few organizations, I've rolled out outreach, love outreach as a product, not to give you a pat on the back there, but what I saw is that, we had sequences for 18 steps and 97% of the conversion was in 9 steps or 12 steps. And so like understanding that side of the business, like why waste your people's time going through all those additional actions that are not fruitful? It's so important to have that turnover and that velocity of new accounts in their market. So I think it's so important, is like, don't overanalyze. And I've had to sit down and have hard conversations with AEs. I'm like, dude, you spent 4 hours trying to pick accounts. Here's parameters, stay within this and go. And like, don't try and overthink it, because you're going to be sitting here and then it's the end of the week and we haven't really engaged with anybody.
Yeah, I love that. A phrase I've used with my teams in the past is like customization at scale, right? It's like, there's a time and a place for maybe your top 5 accounts to dig into the 10Ks and find out someone's a dog lover on Facebook and, really go that extra mile. And it depends on, the sales org and where you are in your stage, right? If your reps books of business are really tight, you can afford to kind of spend more time and be a little more laser focused. But if you're still early stage and like even your ICP is still not super narrowly defined, you still want to be at scale and get enough touch points out there and learn fast. The last thing I'll say on this too is, as leaders, we have to make sure we're enabling our SDRs and A's with good leads too. And so I think it's our job to fight on their behalf. Other parts of the organization, like marketing or others, if they're being asked to go follow up with leads, there's got to be accountability on both sides to make sure we're reporting against that and saying these aren't working. Here's the data. Because again, if we already know the ideal customer profile and personas to sell to, we want to make sure that they're, it's our job to steer them in the right direction so that they are working smart.
Cough, cough, human verified data.
This is such valuable conversation. And while you both were talking, a story triggered for me from one of my past roles. I had a leader that said to me once, done is better than perfect. It may be a phrase you've heard before, it may not be. And it was really, really hard for me when I heard that as an individual contributor. I was the guy when I was selling early in my career that always wanted to do things perfectly. And so if I found Bill as a customer, then I would say, okay, right. I could call Bill right now, but it's 9:15. He might be like still getting settled in. I'll call him a little bit later. And then I'd wait, and then I'd be like, okay, well, I'm about to go to lunch, so I'll call him after lunch. And then I'd wait, and I'd say like, oh, well, Bill might be going to lunch now. It's within that time, so I should wait till later. And I would always find these reasons that it wasn't perfect to do it right now. And it could also be, I don't have the perfect opener. I want to learn more. I want to research more about this person. Like, oh my gosh, Bill has a daughter that plays soccer. I want to talk about that, but I don't know how to connect that to my product. And there's so many ways that you can just spin yourself in circles, truthfully, to stop yourself from actually doing the outreach and instead focusing on the quality of your outreach. And I think what I would say, that the purpose of this phrase, done is better than perfect, is you have to have that balance, right? There has never been an SDR that got to quota by writing one perfect email every day. It just doesn't work that way, right? And so we do have this expectation for us as sellers to make sure that we're meeting these metrics that Bill is talking about, that we are getting to these minimum levels. And you do need to keep quality within that, right? You're using all the data at your disposal. You're right. You're doing customization at scale, like Bill mentioned, where you might be doing business level customization instead of personal customization, where you're multi-threading to 8 people at the same account, and you can use a similar news event around the company versus specifically researching all 8 people and dedicating 15 minutes per person. Now 2 hours have gone by and you've only prospected one account. So make sure that when you're thinking about how you outreach successfully, you're going to be using data that tells you who to reach out to, right? We talked about finding the right people. If we know they're the right people, the nuance of a perfect message isn't going to make or break you. It's just doing it. Be the person that gets out there to your prospects, gets out there to your target accounts, figures out how to connect with them through any way possible, through LinkedIn, through email, through cold call, send them a vidyard, send them a sendoso, like whatever it is that you're going to do to find your way in. Remember that done is better than perfect when it comes to reaching out to your sales prospects, because perfect only gets you so far, and it doesn't get you far enough to get all the way to where you want to go. So we've talked about a lot of stuff, a lot of really valuable stuff. And I will say for everybody out there that is listening, there've been a couple of quick questions that have come through. If you do have any questions for us, please feel free to put those in. We only have one or two more questions that we want to run through, and then we'd love to hear from you all. We did have one question that came through that, David, I'll pass over to you to answer. Does LinkedIn Sales Nav have intent data like Sales Intel, like Zoom Info?
Yeah. So LinkedIn has some level of information. Nicole hit it on triggers, which we use and is one of our probably top 5 strategies, which is job change in the last 90 days. Super big in sales leader. I'm sure outreach. I'm sure you guys target the same thing. We all probably focus on it. I would assume everyone here is doing that, but if you're not, that's probably one of the most valuable. I think the funding trigger as well is helpful, but in my opinion, kind of gets oversaturated, and it's almost, you kind of got to find the right sweet spot of like, you don't want to be there as soon as it hits because everyone else is going to be there. You want to be there kind of a little bit after or a little bit before, if you can time it correctly. So they have that level of information, but nothing really beyond that. Nothing to the level of sophistication that we or Zoom Info, or even some of the stuff Demandbase has a ton of great intent data as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just add on a deal to your question. LinkedIn Sales Navigator is not an intent data provider. They have a really powerful platform that gives you this triggered information. But if you're looking for intent data, what we were talking about earlier of how do I know the people that are searching for my competitors or are searching for what I do before they ever come to me? That's not something that LinkedIn Sales Navigator can bring to the table today. But Sales Intel can do that. Zoom Info can do that. 6 Sense, Demandbase can do that. Lots of different providers for you to consider. Reach out to David and start a conversation with him and your sales leadership to make sure that you guys are totally set up. So I think the last thing we really wanted to make sure we touched on today, before we go into any more questions that you all might have, was just some common mistakes that we see from SDRs, from people that are reaching out. Across the panel here, we have over 50 years of experience in the sales world, and I'm sure we've all been on the end of great, average, and absolutely horrible prospecting efforts that have gone towards us and from us. So David, I'd love to start with you. What would you say is maybe your top mistake that you've seen SDRs or outreachers make that you think that our listeners should try to avoid?
What I personally hate is the show up, throw up. Let me just get into my pitch and hey, the goal of my call is to set up a meeting with you, and it immediately turns me off. I think the focus should be, as Nicole and Bill have kind of touched on, is the right questions that you should be asking, and asking some form of leading question that's going to ultimately help you get back to a conversation around yourself. But you still need to ask that question. You still need to understand. And I think it's part of it is just a mentality issue of like so much BDRs think of like, my goal is to set a demo. And really what I try and tell my team is like, your goal is to have a conversation, and you're weeding out the people that you don't want to talk to find the people that you want to engage and have further conversation with.
Yeah, that's such a good point, David. And I would even say your goal, a way that I have phrased it similarly to you, It's not to book a demo. Your goal is to help the other person,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like the reason we're reaching out to somebody is to help them. We think that what we do can help them.
Mm-hmm.
It's not our choice, right? I don't control the budget at their company. I don't sign contracts for their company. I don't get to choose if it helps them or not. But I believe that what we do can help them. And I'm going to ask them questions that I hope will help them also believe that what I'm going to do will help them. Bill, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it goes back to something you said earlier, Matt, about, done is better than perfect. I'll give you an example. I think a lot of SDRs who are earlier in their career, they get an email response and they don't know what to do with it because maybe it's not a yes, not a no, or it's a no. And they want to go ask 5 people internally about how would you reply to this? When if they just picked up the phone and called the person back right away, their likelihood of catching them on the phone is super high. And they're hopefully they're decent enough on the phone where they can just have a conversation to actually unpack what's really going on, because there's so much can be miscommunicated over email, tone, etc. Most of us here are in a lucky position to sell to other revenue leaders, and so you're talking to people who also like to talk oftentimes. So it's a little inside baseball, but I think a lot of people they're afraid to pick up the phone. They want to write that perfect email that's going to get the response. And so I think getting people out of that mindset is super important. And David, you mentioned something too, just about the opener that got me thinking. And it kind of relates back to Matt, what you were saying. It's kind of creepy how much we know about folks today. It is, but it's also, I think it's important to prove your research and validate why you're reaching out to that person specifically at that organization and given their title and role and responsibilities. There's a fine line there. You don't want to, share too much, but I think that brings a lot more credibility, especially to a cold call, than like making them feel like, again, they're one of like 300 leads you've just called down and gave the same generic messaging to. The more they feel like some real thought was put into why I'm being reached out to, the more likely they're actually going to open up and give you a chance and hear you out. And I think people are sometimes afraid to kind of share how much they know or why they're reaching out,
I love that. And I think Bill, you almost touched on an additional mistake that we see SDRs make, right? Which is when you are doing that outreach or when you do get that response that's not positive, right? Be willing to engage with that person. Pick up the phone, ask a couple questions when they answer. That's going to get you farther than 7 VPs reviewing the email you want to send and it going out 3 days later when they've already forgotten about you. So that was really, really great advice. Nicole, I want to pass it to you. Maybe what would you say is the biggest mistake that you've seen prospectors or SDRs make that you would encourage our listeners to avoid?
For sure. Something I've heard a lot throughout this panel and something that I feel like I'm always talking about, not just because I love to be organized, because it leads to success, is the time management or having a plan. It's really great to have all of these tools, to have all of this information, but if you don't go into your day or into your prospecting block specifically with a plan for how you're going to break down that time and what your expected outcomes are, you're just setting yourself up to fail. There's so many things to be doing as an SDR or an AE that if you're feeling rushed going into your day-to-day, you're not going to have quality cold call openers. You're not going to have quality messaging. You're not going to pick top tier accounts, and it's going to hurt your conversion. And then you get stuck in this loop of, well, I need to do more activity because it's not converting, but I don't have time to increase my conversion because I'm doing so much activity. So I think as you're heading into these different blocks throughout the day, make sure you have those to start with. That's likely going to change day by day, depending on, call times and reply times, but then going into those blocks with outcomes. So how many new or unique accounts do you want to find and reach out to today? How many dials are you looking to do? Are you looking at, those complementary quality metrics like talk time or positive reply rate or even objections? So really being cognizant of what you're looking to achieve in a day, because I was really guilty of this when I was an enterprise SDR. I'd be up until 10 or 11 o'clock at night reading 10K reports because I felt like there was so much I needed to know. Didn't have enough time. I don't personally love reading 10K reports. I'm not even American. So, to avoid that, you really have to be quite rigorous with how you spend your selling and non-selling time. If you don't have a plan for what you expect to come out of that, you're not going to know when to stop. Like you could, in theory, prospect and research all day, every day. So you need to have those guardrails for yourself so you know when you can move on or what you need to come back to if you don't quite finish it.
Such good advice. Such good advice. Thanks, Nicole. I'm going to ask myself the same question so I can share a mistake that I see, because I think we've heard some really, really good answers so far. And one thing I would add that I think relates to a lot of what we talked about, but maybe a little bit different from a direct communication perspective. A mistake that I've seen a lot from prospectors that I would encourage everybody listening to try to avoid is make sure that you're listening. I think that really, really often when we do connect with someone and that conversation begins, there's this trigger that happens for us as the seller that says like, oh my gosh, this is going to work. I have to do X, Y, Z right now. And you have this mindset and this plan, right, that your enablement team taught you and your manager taught you, and you're like, this is going to work. I know that this is going to work. But if the first thing that your prospect said is this weekend, for the first time, I coached my first graders soccer game, talk about that. Like, be a real person that listens to the other person and has that type of two-way communication and be able to adapt to what they're saying because you're actually listening versus, okay, I said this thing now. No matter what they say, next I'm going to tell them this. And then no matter what they say, next I'm going to say, do you want the meeting? That is what so many prospectors are doing these days because I learned this pitch from my enablement team. I learned this from my manager, and I know that this is what I'm supposed to do. And I would actually encourage you all to talk to those leaders and say, do you want me to do this no matter what? Because I would bet your leader will say no. Your leader wants you to listen. They want you to be a real human and have those two-way communications. So think of those pitches, those scripts, those answers as tools in your tool belt, not the required path for every single person. And I have personally seen that when my prospectors or people are prospecting to me, when they have a normal conversation, one of the only meetings that I took in the last year was a LinkedIn video message that was a gal that told me that she plays soccer because I coach soccer as well on the side. And it was a real conversation. And so make sure that you're listening when you're reaching out to everyone before you just simply go into your pitch, go into all your details. So that's my common mistake to avoid. We did get another question, so I want to pose this to the group. We got a question from Vanessa. I keep on seeing that emotional intelligence is becoming increasingly crucial for prospecting, which, Vanessa, I think you're correct. How can we ensure that our data that we know reflects that we're also humans when we are talking to our prospects? Anybody want to give this one a shot?
I think. Go ahead, Nicole.
I was just going to say, I almost see it as two separate things. So I think the data and the intent and all of the research, it does allow you to have, a hypothesis. But I think when it comes to that emotional intelligence, it goes back to what, Matt, you were saying about the assumptive language. Even switching your messaging from will or like very definitive to might or could or something more along those lines. That's how you demonstrate that emotional intelligence, because you're showing you have a hypothesis, you're well-researched, but you're not kind of coming in and telling this leader that's likely more senior than you that you know their business better than them and they absolutely must buy your solution. So I don't think you can necessarily make the data human. That's the point of having teams and why we as leaders don't automate all of these messages, because in theory we could buy leads and put them into a cadence. But really when you bring in that human flair and empathy and the way that you speak to your prospects and communicate that research, I think that's my recommendation, is being very careful of the language you use and how you respond when you do get that engagement.
Yeah, I think it's, I was going to say, I think it's all about listening, right? And just being intentional and not just going in, to your point, Matt, of like, I need to say this thing or I need to do this thing. Like, it's listening and seeing where the conversation goes And I'll tell you, our number one rep, like far and away, he's about to pass annual quota now. He's like 140% of where he's supposed to be. All he does is get referrals, and he'll call somebody and talk to him. And if it's not a fit, hey, who else? He adds value to the conversation. Hey, you know what? It sounds like we might not be a good fit. Who else do you know? Boom, gets a referral, actually pivots into something that's valuable. And he keeps track of them, follows up with them in another year or whatever it might be. But I think it all comes down to really listening.
Awesome. And to the point that Nicole made, I'll just add, right, Devin, I'll use your company as an example. If you're reaching out to somebody that uses ZoomInfo, and we're talking about an emotionally intelligent conversation, right? Would you train your reps to say, hi, Bill, I know you're using ZoomInfo and we can deliver 15% more accurate data? Or would you train your reps to say, Bill, how would it impact your team if all of your target accounts had 15% more accurate contact data when they were reaching out? And we still know, right? We still have that knowledge that we gained from our research, from our data, but we're asking it in an effective way instead of telling the person on the other end, this is what's going to happen. We had one more question slide in really quick. Any insights on when or how to add to the tech stack versus adding sales full-time employees for a very early stage startup? So if I understand this correctly, Stacy, you're asking us about at what point should I invest in software versus investing in more people? I'll give this one a quick shot. The most important thing for an early stage startup when you're starting your selling process is you have to find product market fit. You have to have 20 to 30 raving customers that aren't all friends of your CEO, you've actually been able to sell to at some point, and that are ready, that would tell anybody that asked, I love this product. When you get to that point, you should start investing in systems, because that's when you want to start to scale, right? I'm going to use a tool like Outreach to make sure we email more people and we have insights. I'm going to use a tool like Sales Intel to make sure that I can reach out to the right people at the right companies, because now I know that it works. Before you get to that product market fit, I would advise that you don't want to add a bunch of headcount, because it's really, really hard for that headcount to be successful. You don't know your story. You don't know your ICP. You don't know what's working yet. And I know we're just about out of time, but Stacy, feel free to reach out to any of us on LinkedIn if you do want to talk about this further. And I will also say to everyone out there, not only Stacy, we would love to talk to you about anything prospecting related, SDR related, sales leadership related. We've had a great opportunity to talk to you all today. I want to invite Eduardo back up here to help us wrap up. But thank you everybody for listening and giving us your time today.
Hi, I'm back. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Hey.
Awesome. It says I was muted. Thank you very much. That was incredible. And Matt, you're very generous offering your LinkedIn connections to our audience today. Audience, that's your lucky day, because I'm pretty sure you want to connect with those amazing speakers on LinkedIn and get all your questions answered. We are going to wrap things up, but first I want to thank everyone for attending. We love having you here. I want to see you in the next events that MSP is hosting. Sales Intel has also an upcoming event in October. You're gonna hear about it, so also sign up for this one. I want to say thank you to our wonderful Sales Intel for sponsoring this event. You got all this knowledge thanks to them. And also thank you to Nicole, Bill, Matt, and David for providing this great content and the great insight that you gave us. I feel like I will have to open a t-shirt store, because all your phrases, they are t-shirt and mug worth it. So I'm going to steal this idea. I'm going to steal your phrases, create a store, and make a lot of money. While the panelists and I hang out backstage, the MSP team will make sure that the recording is available on our website soon, and you will also receive a follow-up email with the link for the recording and all the resources that the panelists mentioned during this panel. So you're gonna hear from me pretty soon. Panelists, we can go hang out backstage and talk about the week and how it went. Audience, I'll see you in the next MSP event. Thank you very much, panelists, and Sales Intel for sponsoring. I'll see you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.